Shana Tova. When I was in rabbinical school, I would schlep my books up Broadway to the Jewish Theological Seminary on 122nd Street. I would look enviously at the students headed to the Manhattan School of Music across the street, carrying their instruments. I had wanted to play the cello since high school, but my parents, after years of unsuccessful attempts at getting me to practice piano, were not keen to pay for another instrument and for more lessons, for which I was unlikely to practice. But that first year of rabbinical school, a musician friend of mine ripped the tab off of a bus shelter and gave me the name of a cello teacher. I loved it. I had no idea what I was doing. And starting in my 20s, I had no illusions that I would ever become particularly good at playing, and no intentions of ever playing in front of anyone else. This was for me. Cello was hard and entirely new. It wasn't like piano where the keys are laid out in front of you. You had to find the notes with your fingers, learn how to hold your body the right way. At a time in my life when I was entirely occupied with books, I loved how physical the cello was, needing to build up the strength in my fingers to make the notes really sound, earning the calluses on my fingertips with hours of practice. I loved the music and found it deeply soothing. It had been a long time since I had been a total beginner at anything. In my studies and in my life, I was building on knowledge and experience that I had been developing since before I could remember. Learning to play the cello made me a better teacher. Searching for the posture and the notes, I could empathize with my students who were daunted and intimidated at the prospect of learning the shapes of Hebrew letters and the unfamiliar sounds in their throats. It would help me prepare for the other new things I would need to learn in my 20s and 30s and 40s. How to be a partner, how to be a parent, how to be a mourner. I haven't kept it up, unfortunately, but I still have the cello taking up valuable space in my New York City closet, because one day I will return. And seeing it there reminds me that it's possible to learn something new. This last year and a half has made almost all of us feel like beginners. Of all of the things we thought we knew how to do, the way we went to work or to school, the way we see our families and our friends, the way we move through our daily routines, the way we parent our kids, the way we navigate our relationships, the way we go to shul, all of it changed. New rules, routines upended. All of the ways we thought we were experts went away. We spend so much of our lives trying to build up our core competencies, which become part of our identities. The things we know how to do become much of who we are. I'm a musician, I'm a runner, I'm a knitter. It's why when an injury prevents us from doing something we love, it's so deeply destabilizing. Doing what we know how to do also helps us make order of the world. We feel calmer, more in control when we stay in that realm of the familiar. We feel more successful, more accomplished. But the danger is that we'll stay in that safe zone, only doing what feels comfortable and not venturing out to try new things. That fear might keep us in jobs or relationships longer than is healthy. At least it's familiar, we tell ourselves. At least I know how to do it. The collective injury of COVID has been so destabilizing because we have lost our certainty about how to do all of the things we thought we knew how to do. Our certainty of how to be. And just when we think we're figuring it out, there's new data. We have to learn everything again. It's so hard and so exhausting and so scary. Being that scared and that tired for so long isn't really bearable. So we develop, without really noticing, a hard, brittle shell around our exhaustion and our fear and our vulnerability. Part of why so many of us have been so brittle in this time, and that brittleness has often turned against others, is because we've lost our comfort zone. The footing is always changing. We have lost so much, and we've had to learn so much that is new and uncomfortable. It's like learning the language of a different generation around queer identity and gender expression. What feels safe and affirming for one might be profoundly triggering for another. Let's think for a moment about Sarah in this morning's Torah reading. Sarah as a new parent. She's on new and uncertain footing and reacts in the worst possible way. After decades of marriage to Abraham, she finally gets the child of her prayers and is suddenly in that vulnerable, brittle place, perhaps unsure in her marriage, certainly unsure as a new parent. And when Ishmael metzachek makes fun, makes light of her new child, of her parenting, she has no resilience, no generosity. Only fear and narrowness, which leads her to insist that Ishmael and his mother Hagar be banished into the wilderness, where they almost die of thirst. It can be so hard to read this story without judgment of Sarah for doing that terrible thing, for inflicting that primal injury on Hagar and Ishmael. But what if we looked at her with compassion? What if instead of thinking of her as so unrecognizable in her cruelty, we thought about the ways in which we are like her? The ways in which we ourselves, when overwhelmed with fear and discomfort, have reacted with constriction and behaved in ways of which we are ashamed. We've become smaller, meaner. Needing to learn something new can often feel like we are being pushed in a direction we are not ready to go, or at the very least, not sure how to find. And for many of us, this has been the one constant in this time of COVID, feeling lost and small. Somehow everything is smaller than it used to be, except the fear. So how are we supposed to find our way through this? The Talmud in Masechet Chagiga offers us a parable. It compares the teachings of the Torah to a goad, to a prod on the one hand, and a bed of well-fastened nails on the other. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, words of Torah are like a goad that pushes us, like cattle to fresh grass. They push us to paths of life, to what will sustain us. And like a goad, the Talmud tells us, matters of Torah are flexible or changeable in according to the circumstance. Sometimes we need a little push or a big push to open ourselves to new learning. And it helps if that push can take into account our vulnerabilities and be flexible enough to meet the moment. We want to be flexible, but we also need to be rooted. So, on the other hand, the Talmud continues, teachings of Torah are like well-fastened nails. Nails, of course, are solid, permanent, fixed. Maybe like some of our expectations. Maybe the way some of us wish the world could be. But if we're too rigid in our expectations or our thinking or our routines, we can begin to atrophy. Our creativity and resilience, like nails, as the Gemara warns us, get worn down over time. They become narrower, smaller, diminished. But these nails, like the Torah, the Talmud tells us, are well fastened or planted. The way to counteract the atrophy, the narrowing, is to open ourselves to things we don't already know. This is what happens, the Talmud says, when Torah scholars sit together and study. These groups of sages might debate, sometimes even come to opposite conclusions. It's that debate, that exposure to new and different and even conflicting perspectives that keeps us well grounded. It counteracts the contraction that would otherwise occur if we tried to keep things exactly as they once were. Approaching new things with openness, inviting new ideas and perspectives, forcing ourselves to sit with the discomfort of venturing into the unknown, that's what makes Torah, or life, alive, planted with potential for growth, not stuck. The Talmud knows this is a tall order. Do we really need so much change, so many different voices? It's overwhelming. What if it's too much to tolerate? What if we give up? So after it gives us the paradox of the prod and the nails, we get this mandate from Chagiga. Make your ears like a funnel and acquire for yourself an understanding heart. If we don't want to become brittle, if we don't want to become smaller, we need to make our ears like a funnel to truly stretch and open ourselves to newness so that we can tolerate new voices, all of the differences of opinion, all of the change we might face. It won't be easy. It won't be what we're used to. So, we must acquire for ourselves an understanding heart, a heart that can encompass both loss and learning, a heart that can discern the difference between what we fear and what we can actually tolerate, a heart that can push us forward while keeping us grounded, that can hold both our grief at what is lost and our excitement for what we might yet find. Imagine what might have happened if Sarah had made her ears like a funnel and acquired an understanding heart. Maybe she could have heard Yishmael's voice differently. Maybe she could have experienced Hagar's presence, not as threatening or diminishing, but as a more experienced parent, possibly even a teacher. Maybe she too could have lifted her eyes to discover what would sustain her and nourish her. This summer, in one of my very first returns to live music since the pandemic, I went to a masterclass at Tanglewood with Yo-Yo Ma. The thrill and the fear of being among others, even in a concert hall that's open to the outside at the side, was still with me, and also the exhilaration of witnessing live performance. It felt precious and rare, and I tried to open my eyes and my heart like a funnel to his teaching. I was really moved by the courage of these students who, for the opportunity to learn from one of the greatest cellists of our time, had to be prepared to learn in front of an audience, to take critique in front of hundreds of discerning ears. Even for students as advanced and expert at these, this must be a profoundly vulnerable experience. I think I expected Yo-Yo Ma to offer improvements on technique, how to hold their bodies, how to move their fingers. Instead, he asked deeper questions about their intention, their kavanah. What did they think the piece was about? What did they want the audience to feel? Yo-Yo Ma talked about the sacred relationship between musician and listener in a way that called to mind that Talmudic paradox of the goad and the nails. He asked them to let the essence of the music be their goad, to push them in new directions. He wanted them to make their ears like a funnel, to be firm and rooted in technique for sure, but to be open to the voices of other musicians, to experiment with other interpretations. He wanted them to be the funnel that brings the music off the page, from something rigid and technically perfect to something alive and deeply emotive. He was teaching them to acquire a discerning heart. I'm not sure when will be the next time I hear live music. I don't know what this year will bring. I don't know where the twists and turns will take us, how much more fear, how much more uncertainty. But I pray that we can learn to embrace our beginners' minds. May we learn to tolerate the discomfort enough to let the Torah of this time push us forward. May we remember who we are and what we love. May we make our ears like funnels to take in new voices. May we make for ourselves discerning hearts, be wide open to the emotion, to the unexpected, to the connections that might grow if we allow ourselves to begin anew. May we seek out new companions and new teachers to accompany us on this journey so that we never feel orphaned or alone or cast out, so that we lift our eyes and find new water to sustain us. Shana Tova.